Millionaire CEO canceled his wedding a night before, after his ex mistakenly sent him a photo of a baby he knew nothing about. By 6 o'clock that morning, the entrance of New York's Grand Wellington Hotel looked more like the location of a movie premiere than a wedding venue. Satellite news vans competed for parking spaces while photographers adjusted their cameras, hoping to capture the first glimpse of the bride and groom before the ceremony. Luxury SUVs rolled up one after another, dropping off guests dressed in tailored suits and elegant gowns. Hotel attendants greeted every arrival by name, collecting luggage with practiced smiles. A young reporter fixed her microphone and turned to her cameraman. "Once those doors open," she said, "we'll finally get the first look at the wedding everyone's been talking about." Across the street, a small crowd had already gathered behind the security barriers, hoping to catch a glimpse of billionaire tech CEO Leonardo Bronx or his fiancée, Scarlett Astoria. Lifestyle magazines had spent months covering every detail, from the custom-designed rings to the exclusive guest list. By all appearances, this was going to be a flawless celebration. No one standing outside had the slightest idea they were waiting for an event that would never happen. Inside the hotel, the final preparations had begun before sunrise. Chefs arranged the first trays of handcrafted pastries for the wedding brunch. A florist carefully adjusted white roses around the grand staircase, while musicians tuned their instruments in a private rehearsal room. Event coordinators reviewed schedules, confirming every detail one last time. Then a hotel manager received a phone call. His smile disappeared. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. He listened for several seconds before lowering the phone. "I understand." Within minutes, he walked briskly through the building, speaking to department heads one by one. "The ceremony has been canceled." At first, everyone assumed he meant delayed. "When does it start instead?" one coordinator asked. "It doesn't." Silence followed. The quartet packed away their instruments without playing a single note. Catering staff stopped decorating dessert displays. Florists carefully removed arrangements they had spent hours perfecting. Employees exchanged confused glances, but no one questioned the instruction. Something important had changed. No one knew why. The first guests noticed something was wrong when hotel staff began knocking gently on suite doors. A wedding planner stood outside each room with an apologetic expression. "I'm deeply sorry," she said to an elderly couple. "Mr. Bronx has canceled today's ceremony. Transportation will be arranged for anyone wishing to leave early." "Canceled?" the woman repeated. "There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid there isn't." Similar conversations echoed throughout the hotel. Phones came out almost immediately. One guest texted a relative, "The wedding is off." Another posted online, "Something serious just happened at Leonardo Bronx's wedding." Within minutes, social media filled with theories. He must have gotten cold feet. Did someone expose a secret? Maybe Scarlett called it off. Another woman? Every refresh brought another rumor. Every rumor sounded more convincing than the last. Yet every single one was wrong. By mid-morning, Leonardo's communications office released a statement to every major news outlet. It contained only a few carefully chosen sentences. "Due to an unexpected personal family matter, tomorrow's wedding has been canceled. We sincerely apologize to our family, friends, and guests for the sudden decision." That was all. No interview, no press conference, no photographs, no further explanation. News anchors read the statement repeatedly, hoping to discover meaning between the lines. "A family matter," one commentator asked during a live broadcast. What kind of emergency could force someone to cancel a wedding less than 12 hours before saying "I do"? No one could answer, because even those closest to Leonardo had not yet heard the whole story. Many people assumed someone had walked into Leonardo's life the night before. That wasn't what happened. No mysterious visitor appeared at the hotel. No dramatic confrontation interrupted the evening. No hidden affair came to light. The turning point arrived silently. It fit inside the screen of a mobile phone. One ordinary photograph. No message explaining it. No warning. No request for forgiveness. Just the smiling face of a little boy covered in colorful paint. At first glance, it looked like the kind of picture any proud parent might accidentally share. Except it had reached the one person who was never supposed to see it. And the moment Leonardo looked into that child's eyes, every plan he had made for the future suddenly felt uncertain. The little boy couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Blue paint covered one cheek. A tiny grin stretched across his face as though he'd just finished creating the greatest masterpiece in history. Leonardo almost smiled. Then he noticed something that made him zoom in. His breathing slowed. His thumb hovered over the screen. "No," he whispered. He looked again. The shape of the boy's smile, the curve of his jaw, the tiny birthmark beneath his left ear. Leonardo knew that mark. He had seen it every morning in the mirror since childhood. Only moments earlier, Leonardo had been thinking about tomorrow's vows. Now he couldn't remember a single line he planned to say. One question pushed every other thought aside. Who was this child? He opened the photograph again, then again. Each time, he searched for something proving he was imagining the resemblance. Instead, he found another familiar detail. And another. His heartbeat grew heavier with every passing second. For the first time in years, business meetings, investors, reporters, and wedding schedules no longer mattered. Only one answer did. Leonardo didn't call the media. He didn't call his wedding planner. He didn't even wake his fiancée. Instead, he sat alone, staring at the photograph until the city lights outside his window began fading into morning. When the first rays of sunlight reached the glass, he finally picked up his phone. His voice remained calm. "Cancel everything." The assistant on the other end froze. "Everything, sir?" "Yes." There was a brief silence. Then the assistant quietly replied, "I'll take care of it." With that single conversation, the most anticipated wedding in New York disappeared from the calendar. Outside the hotel, reporters searched for answers. Inside, guests packed their bags in disbelief. Across the country, millions of people debated what had forced one of America's most admired businessmen to abandon the happiest day of his life. None of them knew that the answer had begun with an accidental message sent by a woman he hadn't spoken to in years. A woman who believed she had texted the wrong person. A little boy who had never met the man studying his photograph. And a truth that had remained hidden for far longer than anyone could have imagined. The wedding had been canceled, but the real story was only beginning. Before we uncover how one accidental photograph reopened a chapter both Leonardo and Natalie believed had ended years ago, tell us what you think. If you were in Leonardo's place and recognized something impossible in that child's face, would you have canceled the wedding too, or waited until after the ceremony to search for answers? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with mystery, family, and unexpected turns, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Mr. Williams' Storytime, and stay with us, because the answers are far more emotional than anyone expected. Years before his name appeared on magazine covers or business podcasts, Leonardo Bronx was just another young man trying to stretch every dollar a little further. His apartment sat on the third floor of an aging brick building where the hallway lights only worked when they felt like it. The place was barely large enough for a bed, a tiny kitchen, and a second-hand desk squeezed beside the only window. During winter, cold air slipped through the old window frame, and during summer, the ancient air conditioner rattled so loudly that phone calls became impossible. Still, Leonardo never complained. "You really believe this company is going to change your life?" Every evening after finishing his day job at a small software company, he returned home, changed into an old gray hoodie, and opened the laptop he had bought from a pawn shop with 3 months of savings. One side of the screen displayed lines of computer code. The other held a growing list of ideas he hoped would one day become a business. His closest friend, Chris Hudson, often stopped by carrying 2 paper cups of cheap coffee. "You know," Chris joked one evening as he looked around the apartment, "if success doesn't find you soon, this couch is going to file a complaint." Leonardo laughed without looking away from the screen. "It only has to survive a little longer." Chris placed one of the coffees beside the keyboard. "You've been saying that for almost 2 years, and one day I'll be right." Chris leaned against the doorway and folded his arms. Leonardo finally looked up. "I don't just want it to change mine." "What do you mean?" "I want to build something that gives people opportunities. A place where employees don't wake up every morning wondering if today's the day they'll lose their job." Chris smiled. "You've already planned how you'll treat employees before you've hired your first one." Leonardo shrugged with a quiet grin. "Seems like the right order to me." His bank account rarely held more than a few $100s. Some weeks he skipped eating lunch just to keep enough money available for software subscriptions and internet service. Friends invited him out, but he usually declined. "Another rain check?" Chris asked. Leonardo nodded. "I'm close to figuring something out." Chris laughed. "You've been close since college." "Maybe," Leonardo replied as he turned back to his laptop. "But every day I'm a little closer than I was yesterday." At that moment he had no fortune, no luxury apartment, and no certainty that his dream would ever become reality. What he did have was determination, and before long, someone would walk into his life who believed in that dream almost as much as he did. Leonardo met Natalie Harlem on a rainy Thursday evening. Though neither of them paid much attention to the weather, he had stopped at a small neighborhood bookstore that stayed open later than most places downtown. Whenever he felt stuck on a project, he wandered through the business and technology shelves, hoping a new idea might be hiding inside a book he couldn't yet afford. Natalie was there for an entirely different reason. She was studying to become a pediatric nurse and had come looking for a medical reference book recommended by one of her instructors. Unfortunately, the last copy had already been taken. She let out a disappointed sigh. So much for getting ahead this weekend. Leonardo glanced over. I think they have another location a few blocks away. She smiled politely. I called them before coming here. They're sold out too. Without saying another word, Leonardo looked down at the book in his own hands. It wasn't the one she needed, but he noticed an employee pushing a cart filled with newly returned books. Excuse me, he called. The employee stopped. Any chance there's another copy of the pediatric nursing guide? The employee checked the cart, moved aside 2 novels, and smiled. Looks like someone returned one about 10 minutes ago. Natalie's eyes lit up. You've got to be kidding. The employee handed her the book. Looks like today is your lucky day. She laughed, hugging it against her chest. I owe you one. Leonardo shrugged. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. She extended her hand. I'm Natalie. Leonardo. For a brief moment they simply stood there smiling, neither quite ready to walk away. Natalie broke the silence first. So, what book was important enough to keep you wandering around here this late? Leonardo turned the cover toward her. Building companies that last. She raised an eyebrow. Planning to build one? Trying to. And how's that going? He chuckled. Ask me again in 10 years. She laughed. I just might. Their conversation drifted from books to favorite restaurants, terrible apartment landlords, student loans, and childhood dreams. Neither of them noticed that nearly 40 minutes had passed. As the store manager announced closing time, they walked toward the exit together. Outside, Natalie smiled. You know, most people spend an entire conversation trying to impress someone. And me, you spent yours asking about my classes. Leonardo slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. I figured your future was more interesting than talking about mine. Natalie looked at him for a second longer than she intended. For the first time in a long while, she had met someone who wasn't trying to prove how successful he was. He was simply trying to become someone worth believing in, and without realizing it, she already did. Their first date wasn't expensive. In fact, calling it a date almost felt generous. Leonardo invited Natalie to a little family-owned pizza shop tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. The tables didn't match, the menu had faded corners, and the owner greeted nearly every customer by name. Natalie looked around with a smile. So, this is your favorite place? Leonardo nodded. They know me well enough to let me pay tomorrow if I'm a few dollars short today. She laughed. That either says a lot about you or a lot about your budget. A little of both. Instead of pretending to be someone he wasn't, Leonardo told her the truth. He admitted that his startup wasn't making money yet, that he still worked a regular job to cover rent, and that some months were harder than others. He waited for the conversation to become awkward. It never did. Natalie reached for another slice of pizza. You know what's funny? What? You apologized 3 times for not taking me somewhere fancy. I guess I did. I would have been disappointed if you had. He looked at her, puzzled. Why? Because I'd rather meet the real Leonardo than the version trying to impress me. That simple sentence stayed with him long after dinner ended. Over the following months, they settled into a rhythm that felt effortless. On evenings when Leonardo worked late, Natalie arrived carrying homemade pasta packed into reusable containers. He forgot to eat again, she'd say, placing the food beside his laptop. I was busy. I know. You always know. Someone has to. Other nights he waited outside the hospital after her classes ended, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate during the colder months or fresh lemonade when the weather turned warm. They celebrated small victories most people overlooked. The first client who agreed to try Leonardo's software. The exam Natalie thought she had failed but passed with excellent marks. An old coffee table they found at a neighborhood yard sale and proudly carried home together because it was finally sturdy enough to replace the wobbly one in Leonardo's apartment. Every achievement, no matter how ordinary, became another reason to smile. One evening, Natalie found Leonardo staring silently at his computer after receiving another rejection from a potential investor. She rested a hand on his shoulder. Tough day? He let out a quiet breath. They said the company doesn't have a future. She gently closed the laptop. Good. He blinked. Good. She smiled. One day they'll wish they'd answered differently. Leonardo couldn't help laughing. You always find a way to make me believe again. Natalie squeezed his hand. No. She looked into his eyes with complete certainty. You already believe. Sometimes you just need someone to remind you. In that moment, Leonardo realized something that had nothing to do with business. Before anyone else believed in his company, Natalie had believed in him. And somehow that mattered even more. Autumn became their favorite season. Whenever they both managed to finish work before sunset, Leonardo and Natalie escaped the noise of the city and wandered through Riverside Park. They never needed expensive plans. A long walk, a shared coffee, and uninterrupted conversation were more than enough. One evening the trees were dressed in shades of gold and amber, and the pathways were scattered with crisp leaves that crunched beneath their shoes. Natalie nudged Leonardo with her elbow. "You've been awfully quiet. I'm thinking. That usually means you're solving a business problem." He smiled. "Not tonight." "Oh, I'm trying to picture the future." She tilted her head. "And what does it look like?" Leonardo pointed toward a quiet row of brownstone homes in the distance. "Not there exactly, but somewhere like that." Natalie followed his gaze. "I don't see anything special." "I do," she laughed. "Then tell me what you're seeing." He took a slow breath. "A house with a big kitchen because you always complain that tiny apartments make cooking impossible." She grinned. "That's true. A backyard where our kids can run around without worrying about traffic." "Our kids?" she teased. "You don't have to agree yet." She smiled without answering. "And the best part," he continued, "is the front porch." She looked at him curiously. "The front porch? The biggest one I can build. What makes the porch so important?" "So that when we're old and our knees don't like stairs anymore, we can sit outside every evening, drink coffee, wave at the neighbors, and complain about how young people drive too fast." Natalie laughed so hard she had to wipe a tear from the corner of her eye. "You're already planning our retirement?" "I'm planning every chapter." They reached an empty park bench overlooking the skyline and sat down. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the city begin to glow as office windows lit up one by one. Finally, Natalie turned toward him. "Can I tell you something?" "Always. I don't care if we ever own a huge house." "You don't?" She slowly shook her head. "I don't need the biggest porch in New York." "No? I just want whoever sits beside me on it to still look at me the way you're looking at me right now." Leonardo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gently took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "When we're 80, he said softly, "I'll still be trying to make you laugh." She smiled. "And?" "And I'll still be looking at you like you're the best decision I ever made." Natalie's eyes shimmered. "Promise?" He intertwined his fingers with hers. "I promise." Neither of them realized that life would ask them to keep that promise in a way they never could have imagined. As the months turned into years, Leonardo and Natalie stopped talking about someday, as if it were a distant dream. To them, it felt like something quietly making its way closer. Every Friday evening became their tradition. No matter how busy they were, one of them would bring dinner home. Sometimes it was Chinese takeout, other times it was tacos from the food truck parked 3 blocks away. On the rare occasions when money was especially tight, Natalie would make grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, insisting they tasted better because they were homemade. Leonardo never argued. He only smiled and reached for another bowl. One Friday, Natalie walked into his apartment carrying a small paper bag. "I brought dessert." Leonardo looked inside. "Chocolate chip cookies?" The bakery was about to close. "They're my favorite." "I know," he laughed. "You always know. And you always forget that I've been paying attention." As they ate, Leonardo pulled a folded sheet of paper from the drawer beside his desk. "What's that?" Natalie asked. "My latest business plan." "The newest version?" He nodded. "I think this one's finally different." She took the pages from him and began reading. There were handwritten notes in the margins, arrows pointing to revised ideas, and entire paragraphs crossed out before being rewritten. She looked up. "You've worked on this all week, almost every night." Natalie placed the papers back on the table. "I think it's going to work. You haven't even finished reading it." "I don't have to." He raised an eyebrow. "That confident?" "I'm confident in you." Those words stayed with him longer than she realized. A few weeks later, they spent a Saturday afternoon browsing a neighborhood furniture store, not because they planned to buy anything, but because it was fun imagining the future. Natalie stopped in front of a dining table that could seat 8 people. "Too big," Leonardo said. She smiled. "Not if we fill every chair." "With who?" "Our parents, our friends." She paused before adding with a playful smile, "and maybe a few noisy little people who refuse to finish their vegetables." Leonardo chuckled. "I have a feeling they're going to take after you. They're definitely taking after you. Why me? Because they'll ask 1,000 questions before breakfast." He laughed, and so did she. To anyone watching, they looked like 2 ordinary people dreaming about an ordinary life. They couldn't have known how precious those ordinary moments would become. Because before either of them had the chance to turn those dreams into reality, life placed a series of unexpected obstacles in their path. small enough to seem harmless at first, yet powerful enough to pull two people apart without either of them realizing it. And neither of them understood that the hardest goodbye isn't always the one you say out loud. Sometimes, it's the one you never know has already happened. Life didn't pull Leonardo and Natalie apart all at once. It started with two phone calls made only a few hours apart. The first came on a Monday morning while Leonardo was fixing a software issue at work. His manager appeared beside his desk. "Leonardo, conference room 3. He looked up. "Now?" His manager smiled. "I think you'll want to hear this." Inside the room, two executives from a technology investment firm were waiting. One of them slid a folder across the table. "We've been following your startup." Leonardo blinked. "My startup. We believe it has potential." He opened the folder, scanning the proposal inside. "If you're willing to relocate to Chicago for a few months," the investor explained, "we'll give you office space, experienced mentors, and access to people who can help you grow much faster than you could on your own." Leonardo looked up in disbelief. This could change everything. We think so too." His first thought wasn't about money. It was Natalie. He couldn't wait to tell her. Across the state, Natalie was finishing her shift at the hospital when her phone rang. She smiled as she saw her older sister's name. "Hey, Anne." Anne's voice trembled. "Natalie, it's Dad." Her smile disappeared. "What happened?" "He collapsed this morning." Natalie stood so quickly that her chair tipped backward. "Is he okay?" "The doctors are treating him, but Mom shouldn't be alone right now. I'll leave immediately." By sunset, Leonardo was standing outside Natalie's apartment with a paper bag from their favorite pizza place. He checked his watch. "She's usually home by now." After several minutes he called. No answer. He tried again, straight to voicemail. He frowned. "That's strange." Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "I'm so sorry, family emergency. Dad's in the hospital. I'm heading to Ohio tonight. I'll explain everything when I get there." Leonardo immediately called. This time she answered. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice tired. "You don't have to apologize. How's your dad?" "They're still running tests. When are you coming back?" "I don't know yet." Leonardo leaned against his truck. "I've got something important to tell you too." "Good news?" "I hope so." She smiled despite everything. "Then don't tell me over the phone." "You sure?" "I want to hear it when I get home." He laughed softly. "Deal." There was a brief silence before Natalie spoke again. "Promise me something. Anything. No matter how busy things get, we won't let distance change us." Leonardo didn't hesitate. "I promise. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll be waiting." Neither of them knew that those ordinary words would become the beginning of the longest silence either of them had ever known. The first few days passed exactly as they had promised. Every morning Leonardo called before heading into work. Every evening Natalie called after leaving the hospital where her father was recovering. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes only for 5 minutes. Neither of them minded. Hearing the other's voice was enough. On the 5th day, Leonardo stood outside a downtown cafe waiting for a client when his phone vibrated. "Natalie calling?" He smiled and answered, "Hey, beautiful." Before she could respond, the line crackled. "Leo, can you hear me?" "Barely." "I said." Her voice disappeared. The call dropped. Leonardo frowned and immediately called back, straight to voicemail. He tried again, the same result. He sent a quick message. "Call me when you get a signal." Hours passed without a reply. He assumed she was still at the hospital. What he didn't know was that, only minutes after their call ended, Natalie had realized her phone was missing. She searched her purse, her coat pockets, the nurse's station, the hospital cafeteria. Nothing. A security guard helped retrace her steps, but by then the phone was gone. "I had everything in there," she whispered. Family photos, contact numbers, messages from Leonardo. Even the note he had sent her months earlier that simply read, "You've got this. I believe in you." By evening, she borrowed Anne's phone. "I need to call Leonardo." She dialed from memory. A recording answered. "The number you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please try again later." She frowned. "That's odd." Anne looked over. "Maybe he's in a meeting. Maybe." Accidentally dropping it while rushing between meetings. The screen had shattered beyond repair, and with it went several contacts that hadn't finished syncing to his cloud account. He rubbed his forehead. "I should have backed everything up." Chris glanced at him. "Missing anything important?" Leonardo hesitated. "Just one number I haven't memorized." "You mean Natalie?" He nodded. "I'll get it once she calls." Meanwhile, Natalie believed Leonardo still had her number. Leonardo believed Natalie still had his. Neither realized they were now trying to reach each other using information that no longer existed. Days turned into a frustrating game of missed chances. Whenever one managed to call, the other was unavailable. Messages never arrived. Voicemails failed to connect. Every attempt seemed to end one step short of success. Neither of them stopped trying, but with each unanswered call, a small seed of doubt quietly found its way into their hearts. By the third week, both of them had stopped believing the silence could be explained by bad timing alone. Leonardo had moved into a modest furnished apartment in Chicago while working with the investment team that had backed his company. His days started before sunrise and often ended long after dark, but no matter how exhausted he was, he reached for his phone every evening. Still nothing. One night, Chris called. "So, have you heard from Natalie yet?" Leonardo stared at the city outside his apartment window. "No. Maybe she's still dealing with her dad." "Maybe." Chris hesitated. "You don't sound convinced." Leonardo let out a slow breath. "I don't know what to think anymore." Across the state, Natalie's father had finally been discharged from the hospital, but recovery was slower than anyone expected. Between helping her parents, picking up extra shifts, and trying to keep life together, she barely had time to sleep. Even so, she never stopped checking her phone. Every notification made her heart race. Every time, it was someone else. One afternoon, Anne found Natalie sitting at the kitchen table, turning her phone over in her hands. "You've been looking at that screen for 10 minutes. Natalie forced a smile. "I know. Still waiting?" She nodded. "I keep telling myself there's a reason." "And if there isn't?" Natalie didn't answer. That question frightened her more than she wanted to admit. A few days later, Leonardo searched through an old email account, hoping Natalie might have sent him something there. Nothing. He checked social media. Her profile hadn't been updated in weeks. He typed a message anyway. "I've been trying to reach you. Please let me know you're okay." He pressed send. The message never showed as delivered. He read it twice before quietly closing the laptop. For the first time since they had met, he allowed himself to wonder whether Natalie had made a choice she simply didn't know how to explain. That same evening, Natalie stood outside her parents' house, watching the sunset fade beyond the trees. She whispered words no one else could hear. "If you've decided to let me go, I wish you'd just tell me." Miles away, Leonardo sat alone in his apartment and quietly said almost the very same thing. "I hope you're happy, wherever you are." Neither of them knew the other had spoken those words on the same evening. Neither had stopped loving. They were simply beginning to mistake silence for the truth. Time has a quiet way of changing routines before anyone notices. The daily phone calls became weekly attempts. The weekly attempts became moments of hesitation. Eventually, both Leonardo and Natalie reached the point where picking up the phone felt harder than putting it back down. Not because they had stopped caring, because neither wanted to hear the answer they feared most. Chicago gave Leonardo everything he had worked toward. His mentors introduced him to investors who believed in his ideas. Meetings filled his calendar. His software attracted its first major clients, and for the first time, he saw real money coming into the business. Chris flew in one weekend to celebrate. As they left the company's small office, Chris clapped him on the shoulder. "You did it." Leonardo smiled faintly. "Not yet. You've landed 3 major contracts in 6 months. It still doesn't feel complete." Chris didn't have to ask why. Instead, he handed Leonardo a bottle of sparkling water. "Come on. Where are we going?" "Anywhere that isn't your office." Leonardo laughed. "I've got work to finish." "You always have work to finish." They spent the evening at a neighborhood diner, the kind of place where the waitress remembered regular customers by name. Halfway through dinner, Chris set his fork down. "Can I ask you something?" "You usually do. If Natalie walked through that door right now, what would you say?" Leonardo didn't answer immediately. Finally, he admitted, "I'd ask why she never called." Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Natalie had made a difficult decision of her own. After her father recovered enough to manage on his own, she accepted a full-time position at a children's hospital. The work was demanding, but every smile from a young patient reminded her why she had chosen nursing in the first place. One afternoon, Anne found her laughing with a little girl who proudly showed off a drawing covered in bright colors. "You've got a gift," Anne said later. Natalie smiled. "I just try to make scary days a little less scary." Anne hesitated before speaking again. "You know, it's okay to let yourself be happy." "I am happy. You know what I mean." Natalie looked down for a moment. "I don't miss the past every day anymore." Anne gently squeezed her hand. "But you still miss him." Natalie didn't deny it. She simply smiled through the silence. Without realizing it, both she and Leonardo had started building new lives. Not because they had forgotten each other, because they believed they had no other choice. Nearly 2 years passed. Leonardo's company grew faster than anyone had predicted. The tiny startup that had once operated from a cramped apartment now occupied an entire floor of a downtown office building. He hired talented people, expanded into new markets, and finally achieved the success he had dreamed about for years. The congratulations poured in. Business magazines requested interviews. Investors praised his vision. Friends celebrated every milestone. Yet there were evenings when none of it seemed to matter. Late one Friday, after the last employee had gone home, Leonardo remained alone in his office. Instead of opening another report, he unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a small cardboard box. He hadn't opened it in months. Carefully, he lifted the lid. There was an old movie ticket from their first date, a bookstore receipt with Natalie's handwriting on the back, a faded photograph of the two of them standing beside a street musician, laughing at something neither of them could remember. Leonardo smiled. "You always closed your eyes in pictures," he whispered. His thumb rested gently on the edge of the photograph. "I hope life's been kind to you." He stayed there for several quiet moments before placing everything back into the box. Then he closed the drawer. Across the country, Natalie was sorting through a closet in her apartment after deciding it was finally time to clear away a few old things. At the bottom of one storage bin, she found a worn gray hoodie. She smiled the moment she recognized it. Leonardo had left it at her apartment years ago after falling asleep on the couch during a movie marathon. She slipped it over her shoulders. The sleeves were still too long. "It still smells like coffee," she murmured with a soft laugh. Anne walked past the bedroom and stopped at the doorway. "I wondered where that disappeared to." Natalie looked down at the oversized hoodie. "I guess I forgot to give it back." Anne studied her younger sister for a moment. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself. I'm not. You've held on to that hoodie longer than some people keep marriages together." Natalie smiled, though her eyes glistened. "I think I'm finally ready." She carefully folded the hoodie and placed it inside a donation box. Before closing the lid, she rested her hand on top for a moment. "I hope you found everything you were looking for, Leo." That same evening, hundreds of miles away, Leonardo turned off the lights in his office and quietly whispered words no one else would ever hear. "Goodbye, Nat." Neither of them knew that fate had already begun arranging a meeting neither had stopped wishing for. And before either of them could move completely beyond the past, a little boy named Jacob Brooklyn would quietly change both of their lives forever. 6 years had changed almost everything about Leonardo Bronx's life. The old pickup truck had been replaced by a collection of luxury cars he rarely drove himself. The cramped apartment had given way to a penthouse overlooking Manhattan. His calendar was filled with board meetings, interviews, and investment calls instead of late-night coding sessions. Yet one habit had never changed. Whenever something important was about to happen, he preferred being alone. The afternoon before his wedding, his executive assistant walked into the penthouse carrying a garment bag. "Your tuxedo has arrived." Leonardo thanked her before hanging it beside the bedroom door. "It fits perfectly," she said. "I hope so." "You don't sound excited." He smiled politely. "I've just got a lot on my mind." After she left, the apartment became quiet again. His phone buzzed every few minutes. "Welcome to married life. See you tomorrow. The rehearsal dinner starts at 7. Don't be late." Leonardo answered a few messages before setting the phone aside. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Far below, traffic moved through the streets while people hurried home from work, completely unaware that tomorrow's wedding would dominate headlines across the country. There was every reason to feel happy. Scarlett Astoria was intelligent, kind, thoughtful, and patient. She had never cared about his wealth or the attention that followed him everywhere. She challenged him when work consumed too much of his life and celebrated his victories without ever trying to take credit for them. She loved Leonardo. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just Leonardo. He loved her too. So why did something feel unfinished? He couldn't explain it. The feeling wasn't fear, it wasn't regret. It was more like standing in front of a familiar door without remembering why it had once been so important. He rubbed the back of his neck and quietly laughed at himself. "You're getting married tomorrow," he muttered. "Stop overthinking everything." For a moment he believed he had. Then his phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't another wedding message. It was from the one person who had known him longer than almost anyone else. Chris Hudson. Leonardo picked up his phone almost immediately. If Chris was calling the night before his wedding, there was usually only one reason. He wanted to make sure his best friend hadn't buried himself in work again. Instead of answering, Leonardo saw a text. "Chris, still awake?" A small smile crossed his face. "Leonardo, barely." The reply came almost instantly. "Chris, that's a lie." Leonardo chuckled. "Leonardo, you caught me." A few seconds later the phone rang. Leonardo answered. I figured you'd call. Chris laughed. I figured you'd still be staring out a window instead of getting some sleep. Am I really that predictable? After 20 years, absolutely. Leonardo walked toward the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. So, Chris asked, how's the future husband doing? Leonardo leaned against the counter. I think everyone else is more excited than I am. Nervous? A little. Chris wasn't surprised. I remember your first investor meeting. You looked exactly like this. That was different. Was it? Leonardo smiled. I wasn't promising to spend the rest of my life with someone. No, Chris replied. You were betting your entire future on an idea. I'd say that's pretty close. Leonardo laughed softly. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that only existed between old friends, comfortable, familiar, and never awkward. Finally, Chris asked the question he had been holding back. Do you love Scarlett? Leonardo answered without hesitation. Yes. Then what's bothering you? Leonardo stared at the skyline beyond the glass. I honestly don't know. Chris waited. Sometimes Leonardo found the answer simply by talking. I've checked every detail for tomorrow, Leonardo continued. The venue, the guests, the schedule, everything's ready. But it feels like I forgot something. Chris smiled to himself. You've always hated unfinished business. I guess I have. You know, Chris said, being nervous doesn't mean you're making a mistake. Leonardo listened quietly. It usually means whatever's ahead matters enough to scare you. Leonardo nodded, though Chris couldn't see him. I hope you're right. I usually am. Oh. Who's the one who convinced you not to quit your company after your second investor rejected you? Leonardo laughed. You'll never let me forget that. Not a chance. Chris's voice became warmer. Tomorrow, marry the woman you love. I will. And after that. What? Take a vacation. Leonardo grinned. Now that's the most unrealistic thing you've said all year. Both men laughed. Neither realized that before the night was over, every plan they had joked about would disappear because of one message neither of them could have imagined. Astoria's parents' home was filled with the kind of laughter that only comes before a family celebration. The dining room table had disappeared beneath photo albums, handwritten place cards, ribbon samples, and half-finished cups of tea. Her bridesmaids moved from room to room, steaming dresses, comparing shoes, and teasing Scarlett every chance they got. You still have time to run, one of them joked. Scarlett laughed as she adjusted the sleeve of her robe. And miss all this planning? Never. Her younger cousin held up an old photograph. Look at you. You couldn't have been more than 8. Scarlett walked over and smiled. I wanted that little white dress so badly. You've been planning your wedding since elementary school. Not exactly. Oh, really? Scarlett pointed at another picture of herself covered in paint after helping her father build a birdhouse. I actually wanted to be an architect first. Her father overheard the conversation as he entered the room carrying a tray of fresh pastries. And you became one. Scarlett kissed him on the cheek. Thanks to you, he smiled proudly. You built your career one drawing at a time. Tomorrow is just another beautiful thing you've built. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed Scarlett's hand. You've never looked happier. Scarlett smiled. I am happy. She meant every word. Leonardo had never tried to change who she was. He admired her ambition, respected her opinions, and never treated her accomplishments as less important than his own. That was one of the reasons she had fallen in love with him. Still, there was one corner of his heart she had never been able to reach, not because he refused to let her in, because whenever the conversation wandered toward his past, something quietly changed behind his eyes. One evening months earlier, she had asked him a simple question. Who taught you to make grilled cheese like that? Leonardo had smiled. Someone a long time ago. He had said nothing more. Scarlett hadn't pressed him. Everyone carries memories they don't always know how to explain. Now, as her mother fastened a delicate bracelet around her wrist, she asked gently, Everything all right? Scarlett nodded. Of course. You seem thoughtful. She glanced toward the window. I was just wondering. What, if a person can truly leave the past behind? Her mother smiled kindly. I don't think we leave it behind. Scarlett looked back at her. I think we simply learn how to make room for the future. Scarlett smiled. She liked that answer. She had no reason to believe that, at that very moment, the past was already making its way back into Leonardo's life. Several hundred miles away, Natalie Harlem finally clocked out after one of the busiest shifts she'd worked in weeks. The pediatric ward had been full from the moment she arrived that morning. One little girl had insisted on introducing every stuffed animal she owned before allowing anyone to check her temperature. A teenage patient had celebrated finishing his last round of treatment, and the entire nursing team applauded as he rang the hospital's victory bell. By the time Natalie reached the parking lot, her feet ached. Still, she smiled. Long days were easier to carry when they ended with home. As she unlocked the front door to her apartment, she barely had time to step inside before a pair of tiny feet came racing down the hallway. "Mom!" Jacob launched himself into her arms with enough enthusiasm to make her laugh. "Whoa!" She hugged him tightly. "There's my favorite explorer." Jacob grinned from ear to ear. "I stayed awake, so I noticed. I wanted to show you something." Without waiting for permission, he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. Sheets of construction paper covered the table. Paintbrushes, crayons, and colorful dinosaur stickers were scattered everywhere. Jacob proudly held up one of his paintings. "I made this one all by myself." Natalie studied the bright green dinosaur wearing what looked like a superhero cape. "I think this might be the bravest dinosaur I've ever seen." "It is. What's his name?" Jacob thought very seriously. "Mr. Chompy." Natalie laughed. "Perfect." From the stove, Aunt Chelsea smiled as she stirred a pot of soup. "I told him to wait until after dinner to show you. He said inspiration couldn't wait." Jacob nodded proudly. "Exactly." The three of them sat down to eat together, talking about everything from dinosaurs to school projects and the stray cat Jacob hoped would someday decide to live on their porch. For a little while, life felt wonderfully ordinary. After dinner, Natalie helped Jacob brush his teeth before tucking him into bed. "Story?" he asked hopefully. "Just one. You always say that, and somehow we always end up reading too." Jacob giggled. By the time the second story ended, his eyelids had begun to droop. Natalie kissed his forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." "Love you, Mom." "I love you more." She quietly closed the bedroom door behind her. Anne was waiting in the hallway with 2 mugs of tea. "Long day?" Natalie accepted one with a grateful smile. "The longest." Anne hesitated. "Do you remember what tomorrow is?" Natalie's smile faded just slightly. She looked down into her cup before answering. "Yes." Neither sister said another word. Some dates never disappeared from the calendar, no matter how much time passed. And tomorrow happened to be one of them. Anne carried the tea into the living room while Natalie settled onto the couch, grateful to finally sit down. For a few minutes, they talked about ordinary things. Jacob's upcoming school field trip, their parents' weekend visit, whether the old washing machine had finally reached the end of its life. It was the kind of conversation that helped wash away the weight of a long day. Then Anne glanced at the clock. "I almost forgot." "What?" "I promised Mom I'd send her the pictures Jacob painted this afternoon." Natalie smiled. "The dinosaur masterpieces?" "The very same." Anne reached for her phone before remembering it was charging in the bedroom. "Could you send them from yours?" "Sure." Natalie unlocked her phone and opened the family photo album. Dozens of pictures filled the screen. Jacob grinning with blue paint on his nose. Jacob proudly holding up a cardboard volcano. Jacob standing in the kitchen wearing an apron far too large for him. "He was determined to paint every dinosaur that ever existed," Anne said with a laugh. "I think he invented a few new species." Natalie selected 3 of her favorite photos and tapped share. The family group chat appeared at the top of the screen. Without thinking, she pressed it. Just then, another notification slid across the display, pushing the conversation list slightly downward. Her thumb landed a fraction lower than she intended. She tapped send. The pictures disappeared. Message delivered. Natalie smiled and locked her phone. "There," she said. "Done." A few seconds later, the phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Her smile vanished. The conversation now open wasn't her family group. It was an old message thread she hadn't opened in 6 years. At the top of the screen were 2 words she never expected to see again. Leonardo Bronx. Her heart skipped. "No." Anne looked up immediately. "What is it?" Natalie stared at the screen, barely able to breathe. "I sent the pictures." Anne walked closer. "To who?" Natalie slowly turned the phone toward her. Anne's eyes widened. "Oh, Natalie, I didn't mean to." She frantically searched for the option to remove the message. "Come on." Her fingers trembled. Nothing happened. The delivery confirmation remained. "Too late. He already has it," she whispered. Anne gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he won't even notice." Natalie wanted to believe that. She really did. With shaking hands, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Before anyone answered, panic got the better of her. She ended the call. Almost immediately, she typed the only message she could think of. "I'm so sorry. That picture wasn't meant for you." She hit send and lowered the phone onto the coffee table. Neither sister spoke. Across the country, inside a quiet penthouse where tomorrow's groom was trying to convince himself to get some sleep, a phone vibrated softly on a bedside table. 1 notification. 1 forgotten contact. 1 photograph. And within the next few minutes, a future that had taken years to build would begin changing in ways no one could have predicted. Leonardo had just switched off the bedroom lights when his phone vibrated across the nightstand. Without looking, he reached for it. "Probably another wedding message," he murmured. The screen lit up. His hand froze. Natalie Harlem. For a long moment, he simply stared at the name. 6 years. Not a birthday message. Not a holiday greeting. Nothing. Now, on the night before his wedding, her name had suddenly appeared as though those missing years had never existed. He slowly unlocked the phone. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single photograph. At first he smiled without thinking. A little boy sat at a kitchen table covered in colorful finger paint. Blue and green smudges decorated his cheeks, and he held up a paper dinosaur with the proud grin only children could wear after finishing something they believed was extraordinary. Leonardo couldn't help laughing softly. Well, someone looks pleased with himself. He was about to lock the phone when something made him pause. The smile. It felt familiar. He opened the picture again. The little boy's head was tilted ever so slightly to one side. Leonardo had seen that expression before. Not in a photograph, in a mirror. He frowned. That's impossible. He enlarged the image. The child's eyes seemed brighter now that they filled the screen. Then his attention shifted lower. Just beneath the boy's left ear was a tiny birthmark. Leonardo's breathing slowed. He instinctively touched the same spot beneath his own ear. The mark had been there his entire life. His younger brother had one too. So had their father. When Leonardo was a teenager, his grandmother used to tease the family every Thanksgiving. "The Bronx men never lose that little mark," she'd say with a smile. "It's our family's signature." He hadn't thought about those words in years. Now they came rushing back all at once. His heartbeat grew heavier. No. He zoomed in even closer, searching for anything that proved he was imagining the resemblance. Instead, the similarities became harder to ignore. The shape of the eyebrows, the curve of the smile, even the way the little boy held the paintbrush, reminded him of old family photographs from his childhood. Leonardo lowered the phone for a moment and rubbed his face. "This doesn't make any sense." Just then, the phone began ringing. The caller's name flashed across the screen once again. Natalie Harlem. Leonardo looked at the display without moving. His thumb hovered over the answer button. Before he could decide, the ringing stopped. A second later, another message appeared. "I'm so sorry. That picture wasn't meant for you." Leonardo read the sentence twice, then a third time. Her apology barely registered. His eyes kept drifting back to the photograph, back to the little boy, back to the question that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. Who was he? Leonardo placed the phone on the nightstand. He lasted all of 3 seconds before picking it up again. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. He opened the photograph once more. This time, he wasn't looking at the little boy as a whole. He studied every tiny detail. The child's smile, his posture, the way one sleeve of his pajamas had been rolled halfway up, as though he'd been too excited about painting to notice. Nothing about the picture looked staged. It was simply a mother capturing an ordinary moment, which made it even harder to understand why it had unsettled him so deeply. Leonardo enlarged the image until it became slightly blurry. His attention settled on the birthmark again. He remembered being 10 years old and asking his father why all the men in their family seemed to have the same tiny mark. His father had laughed. "Think of it as nature's way of making introductions." "What do you mean? If you ever meet someone with that same little mark, there's a good chance they're family." At the time, Leonardo had rolled his eyes. Now those words refused to leave his mind. He set the phone down again and walked into the kitchen. A glass of water usually helped him think. Tonight, it didn't. He leaned against the counter and stared into the darkness beyond the windows. "You're making connections that aren't there," he whispered. People looked alike all the time. Children often reminded strangers of someone they had once known. That was normal, reasonable, yet the feeling wouldn't leave. He returned to the bedroom and opened an old photo album stored in the bottom drawer of his dresser. Inside were pictures from family vacations, birthday parties, and holidays stretching back decades. He found one of himself at about 6 years old. Messy hair, paint on his shirt, a crooked smile. Leonardo placed the childhood photograph beside the image on his phone. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was trying to convince himself he was wrong. Instead, the similarities became even more difficult to dismiss. "Guess figured you'd still be awake," Chris said with a grin before noticing the serious expression on his friend's face. "What happened?" Leonardo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held out the phone. Chris looked at the picture. "Cute kid. Look closer." Chris frowned. "At what?" Leonardo handed him the old childhood photograph as well. Chris compared the two images. His smile slowly faded. I know." Chris looked back and forth between the pictures several times. Finally, he met Leonardo's eyes. "You think this little boy—" Leonardo finished the sentence quietly. "I don't know what to think anymore." Chris sat down slowly, still holding the two photographs. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Chris broke the silence. "Have you talked to Natalie?" Leonardo shook his head. "Not in 6 years. And tonight she sends you this? By accident?" "That's what her message says." Chris studied the little boy's face again. "How old do you think he is?" Leonardo looked at the screen. 5, maybe 6. Chris quietly did the math in his head. The room fell silent again. Neither of them wanted to say what both were thinking. Leonardo rubbed his temples. "There has to be another explanation." "There might be, but I can't find one." Chris leaned forward. "If this is just a coincidence, you'll eventually find out. And if it isn't—" Chris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a different question. "Would you be able to stand at that altar tomorrow without knowing?" Leonardo looked toward the tuxedo hanging neatly beside the closet. Just hours earlier, it had represented the beginning of a new chapter. Now it felt strangely out of place. "I don't know." "You've built your whole life on finding answers," Chris said gently. "You've never been the kind of man who ignores a question simply because the timing is inconvenient." Leonardo gave a tired smile. "You always know exactly what to say." "I've had a lot of practice." Leonardo picked up the phone again. His thumb hovered over Natalie's name. Call her, ask, end the uncertainty. It sounded simple. Child wasn't his. What if he called and reopened wounds that had finally healed? What if Natalie had moved on and was happily raising her son with someone else? He slowly lowered the phone. "I can't accuse her of something I don't even understand." Chris nodded. "Good." Leonardo looked surprised. "You agree?" "I do." "So what am I supposed to do?" Chris stood and walked toward the window. "Start with the truth." "What truth?" "The only one you actually know." He turned back toward Leonardo. "You received a photograph that raised a question you can't ignore." Leonardo looked at the picture once more. The little boy's smile somehow seemed even more familiar now. He realized he hadn't thought about tomorrow's wedding in nearly an hour. Not the vows, not the guests, not the reception. Only one question remained. Who was Jacob? And why did looking into that child's face feel less like meeting a stranger and more like remembering someone he had always known? Chris checked the time. It was well past midnight. "You should try to get some rest," he said. Leonardo gave a quiet laugh. "I don't think sleep is interested in finding me tonight." Chris couldn't argue with that. He placed a reassuring hand on Leonardo's shoulder. "Whatever this turns out to be, don't make a decision based on fear." Leonardo nodded. "I won't. And don't make one based on assumptions either." "I know." Chris glanced at the phone one last time before heading toward the door. "Call me if you need anything." "I will." The apartment fell silent again. Leonardo walked back to the window overlooking the city. Far below, traffic had almost disappeared. The streets that had buzzed with activity only hours earlier now looked unusually calm. He remembered another night years ago, a tiny apartment, an old laptop balanced on a worn desk, Natalie asleep on the couch after insisting she would stay awake until he finished working. He had covered her with a blanket without waking her. The memory arrived so clearly that he could almost hear her sleepy voice. "Wake me up when you're done." He closed his eyes. "I thought I'd finally moved on," he whispered. His phone buzzed again. Not Natalie, his assistant. "Good evening, Mr. Bronx. Just confirming tomorrow's schedule. Your car will arrive at 9 a.m. Hair and wardrobe begin at 9:30. Guests are expected by 11, and the ceremony starts promptly at noon. Please let me know if anything changes." Leonardo stared at the message. Anything changes. The words lingered in his mind. He looked toward the garment bag hanging beside the closet. Everything for tomorrow had been planned months in advance. The seating chart, the flowers, the music, the vows, thousands of details all carefully arranged. Yet none of those plans answered the question that now refused to leave him. He picked up the photograph again. The little boy's smile somehow carried no secrets at all. It was innocent, carefree, completely unaware that a single picture had turned a stranger's world upside down. Leonardo exhaled slowly. "If you really are connected to me." He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. He wasn't ready to give Hope a voice. Not yet. Instead, he opened his contacts and selected one name, Natalie Harlem. His thumb hovered over the call button. He took a deep breath. Then, instead of pressing it, he locked the phone. Some conversations were too important to have in the middle of the night. If he wanted the truth, he wanted to hear it face to face. And by the time that decision settled in his mind, another, even more difficult one had quietly begun taking shape. The assistant remained frozen for several seconds after the call ended. She looked around her office as though someone else might explain what she had just heard. Finally, she picked up another phone and contacted the wedding coordinator at the Grand Wellington Hotel. "This is Evelyn from Mr. Bronx's office." "Good morning," the coordinator replied cheerfully. "We're just putting the finishing touches on the ballroom." Evelyn swallowed. "I'm afraid I have unexpected news." There was a pause. "What kind of news?" "The wedding has been canceled." Silence. "I'm sorry. You heard me correctly." "No, there must be some misunderstanding. The guests have already arrived." "I understand. The flowers are finished." "I know. The musicians are here." "I know. The ceremony begins in a few hours." Evelyn closed her eyes. "It won't." Within minutes, calls spread throughout the hotel. The head chef was told to stop preparing the reception meal. The musicians were asked to pack their instruments. Valet attendants were instructed to expect early departures instead of new arrivals. Every department asked the same question. Why? No one received an answer. Guests noticed the change almost immediately. A couple from California stepped off the elevator expecting breakfast before the ceremony. Instead, they found hotel staff speaking in hushed voices. An older gentleman approached the front desk. "Excuse me, what time does the shuttle leave for the chapel?" The receptionist offered an apologetic smile. "Sir, there won't be a ceremony today." He blinked. "I'm sorry. The wedding has been canceled." His wife slowly lowered the coffee cup she had been holding. "Canceled?" "Yes. What happened?" "I'm afraid we haven't been given any additional information." Around the lobby, similar conversations unfolded. Friends exchanged puzzled looks. Family members checked their phones. Some laughed nervously, convinced the delay was part of an elaborate misunderstanding. Others immediately sensed something far more serious. One guest quietly whispered, "Nobody cancels a wedding like this unless there's a very good reason." Outside, reporters noticed delivery trucks leaving the hotel much earlier than expected. Cameras quickly turned toward the entrance. Within minutes, the first breaking news alert appeared online. Wedding of tech CEO Leonardo Bronx suddenly called off. The story spread faster than anyone inside the hotel could have imagined. Scarlett was fastening a small pair of pearl earrings when her maid of honor noticed her phone vibrating for the 5th time. "You'd better answer," she said. Scarlett smiled. "It's probably another good luck message." She picked up the phone. The caller was Leonardo's assistant. "Good morning, Evelyn." There was hesitation on the other end. "Miss Astoria." Something in her voice immediately felt wrong. "Is Leonardo all right? He's safe." Scarlett released a small breath of relief. "Thank goodness, but—" Her heart tightened. "The wedding has been canceled." The room became perfectly still. Scarlett frowned. "I'm sorry." "What did you say?" "I'm deeply sorry." "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't." Scarlett slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. "No." Her bridesmaids looked toward her, their smiles fading. "No, that's impossible. I'm only sharing the instructions I was given." Scarlett spoke quietly now. "Did Leonardo tell you why?" "No." "Is he hurt?" "No." "Is someone in his family hurt?" "I wasn't told." Scarlett thanked her before ending the call. The room remained silent. Her mother stepped closer. "What happened?" Scarlett looked up. "The wedding," her voice broke, "isn't happening." Nobody knew what to say. Chris arrived at Leonardo's penthouse less than 20 minutes later. He found his friend exactly where he expected, standing beside the window, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still holding his phone. Chris walked inside quietly. "You look terrible." Leonardo managed a tired smile. "I feel worse." Chris sat across from him. So, are you absolutely certain?" Leonardo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed Chris the phone again. Jacob's smiling face filled the screen. "I've looked at this picture at least 50 times. And? The feeling hasn't changed." Chris nodded. "Then what happens now?" "I find Natalie." "And Scarlett?" Leonardo lowered his head. "I owe her the truth." Chris leaned forward. Then tell her yourself. I will. No emails. I know. No assistant. I know. No statements. Leonardo nodded slowly. She deserves better than that. Chris watched him carefully. You still love her. I do. And you're still canceling the wedding. Leonardo closed his eyes. If I walk down that aisle today while wondering whether I have a son somewhere in this country. He paused. I'd spend the rest of my life questioning the decision. Chris didn't disagree. Sometimes there wasn't a good choice, only the one a person believed they could live with. Nearly an hour later, Leonardo finally dialed Scarlett's number. She answered immediately. Leonardo, I'm sorry. Those were the first words he could manage. She remained quiet for several seconds, then she asked softly, Can we meet? Of course. I don't want excuses. I understand. I just want the truth. You'll have it. She ended the call. Leonardo lowered the phone. For the first time that morning, he realized how many lives had been affected by a single decision. Guests had traveled across the country. Families had gathered. Friends had taken time away from work. Most importantly, a woman who had trusted him completely was now sitting in a wedding dress with no idea why her future had disappeared overnight. He took one last look at Jacob's photograph. I hope this is worth the pain it's causing. Chris stood beside him. Whatever answer you're about to find. Leonardo looked toward the door. It's already changed my life. He picked up his car keys. There would be no wedding, no celebration, no honeymoon, only questions waiting for answers. And somewhere, several hundred miles away, Natalie had no idea that one accidental photograph had just set all of this into motion. Leonardo is finally on his way to face Scarlett, and afterward, he intends to find Natalie. Meanwhile, Natalie is still trying to convince herself the mistaken message has already been forgotten, unaware that the man she hasn't seen in 6 years is about to reappear in her life. Scarlett chose a quiet botanical garden on the edge of Manhattan. It was one of the few places where reporters were unlikely to find them. By the time Leonardo arrived, she was sitting alone on a wooden bench overlooking a small pond. Her wedding dress had been replaced with a simple cream-colored sweater and blue jeans. Her makeup was gone, leaving only the faint redness around her eyes. She looked up as he approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Leonardo stopped a few feet away. I'm sorry. Scarlett studied him carefully. I know you are. She patted the empty space beside her. Sit. He did. The silence stretched between them until Scarlett finally asked the question that had been echoing in her mind all morning. Did you fall in love with someone else? No. Did you stop loving me? He answered immediately. No. She looked confused. Then why am I sitting here instead of getting married? Leonardo reached into his jacket pocket and handed her his phone. I need you to see something. Scarlett looked down at the screen. A smiling little boy held up a brightly painted dinosaur. She frowned. Who's this? I don't know. She looked back at him. Then why is this picture so important? Leonardo pointed to the child's left ear. I think he might be my son. Scarlett's eyes widened. She stared at the photograph again, this time much more carefully. You think? I honestly don't know. Did Natalie tell you he was yours? No. Has she contacted you? Not for years. He explained everything. The accidental message, the birthmark, the resemblance, the apology that followed. When he finished, Scarlett sat quietly for several moments. Finally, she asked, If you had ignored that picture? Leonardo slowly shook his head. I would have spent every anniversary wondering. Scarlett lowered her eyes, and eventually, you would have hated yourself. He nodded. She gave a faint, bittersweet smile. I think so too. Scarlett folded her hands together. I was angry. You have every right to be. I wanted to believe you were making a terrible mistake. Leonardo remained silent. But now, she looked toward the water. I think you're doing the only thing you can. He turned to her. I'm still hurting you. Yes. Her honesty landed harder than any accusation. But I'd rather be hurt by the truth than comforted by a lie. Titan, I never wanted this. I know. Scarlett smiled through tears. That's the worst part. She reached into her purse and removed a small velvet box. Inside was the wedding ring he had placed on her finger months earlier. She held it out. I can't keep this. Leonardo gently pushed the box back toward her. No. She looked surprised. It's yours. I bought it for our future. And that future changed. So let it remind you that someone loved you honestly. Scarlett closed the box again. You always did know how to make saying goodbye harder. A quiet laugh escaped both of them, not because anything was funny, because sometimes laughter is the only thing standing between heartbreak and tears. Before standing, Scarlett looked directly into his eyes. If that little boy really is your son, she paused. Don't waste another day. Leonardo nodded. I won't, and if he isn't, I'll live with whatever the truth is. She smiled gently. I hope you find peace. You deserve it too. They walked away in opposite directions. Neither hated the other. Sometimes love simply arrives at the wrong chapter. Back in Ohio, Natalie had convinced herself the accidental message had caused nothing more than a brief moment of embarrassment. He probably deleted it, Anne said while folding laundry. I hope so. You've apologized. I know. So stop worrying, Natalie smiled. I'll try. Life quickly returned to its usual rhythm. She worked 3 consecutive shifts at the children's hospital. Jacob proudly announced that he had scored the winning goal during recess, and spent an entire evening helping him build a cardboard spaceship that barely fit through the apartment doorway. Ordinary life settled back into place. Until Thursday afternoon. Natalie was reviewing patient charts when her supervisor approached. Natalie? Yes? There's someone asking for you downstairs. She looked surprised. My sister? I don't think so. A parent? He didn't say. Natalie removed her name badge and headed toward the lobby. As the elevator doors opened, she spotted a tall man standing near the reception desk with his back turned. Something about the way he stood felt strangely familiar. Before she could speak, he slowly turned around. Her footsteps stopped. The world seemed to disappear for a single heartbeat. Leonardo? He offered a small, nervous smile. Hi, Nat. 6 years vanished in 2 words. Neither of them moved. The receptionist glanced between them before quietly returning to her paperwork, sensing this wasn't a conversation that needed an audience. Natalie finally found her voice. What are you doing here? I was hoping we could talk. She looked at the clock. I'm still working. I'll wait. You came all the way to Ohio. Because I needed answers. She immediately understood. Her eyes dropped toward the phone still clutched in his hand. The picture. Leonardo nodded. I didn't come here to accuse you. I know. I came because I don't understand. Natalie took a slow breath. There are things I don't understand either. She asked one of the nurses to cover the rest of her break, then led Leonardo outside to a small courtyard behind the hospital. They sat across from each other at a picnic table beneath a large maple tree. For several moments, neither knew where to begin. Finally, Leonardo spoke. When we stopped talking, Natalie interrupted softly. You think I left? I thought you did. She stared at him in disbelief. You thought I walked away. I called. So did I. I wrote. I never got anything. I waited. So did I. They looked at each other, equally confused. For the first time, both realized they had been living with completely different versions of the same story. Natalie slowly folded her hands. After Dad got sick, everything happened so quickly. Leonardo listened without interrupting. My phone disappeared at the hospital. I know what that feels like. She looked surprised. You do? I lost mine that same week. She blinked. You lost yours? He nodded. My contacts weren't backed up. Natalie let out a quiet laugh of disbelief. I borrowed Anne's phone to call you. I was trying to call you from a replacement number. I thought you stopped answering. I thought you changed yours. They sat in stunned silence. Years of heartbreak suddenly looked painfully different. Neither of them had chosen to leave. Neither had decided the relationship was over. They had simply been separated by terrible timing, missing information, and a growing belief that the other had already moved on. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. We lost 6 years. Leonardo looked down, because neither of us knew how to find the other. Before either of them could say another word, a cheerful little voice echoed across the courtyard. Mom! Both adults turned. Jacob came running through the hospital doors, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders after finishing a children's activity program. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around Natalie's waist. I made another dinosaur today. Natalie hugged him automatically, though her eyes never left Leonardo. Jacob looked up curiously at the unfamiliar man. Hi. Leonardo smiled, his voice almost disappearing. Hi, buddy. For the first time, they were standing only a few feet apart. Neither of them knew it yet, but this simple introduction was about to answer the biggest question of Leonardo's life. Jacob looked from Natalie to Leonardo with the fearless curiosity only children seem to possess. Mom, he asked, is this your friend? Natalie hesitated. The question sounded simple. The answer wasn't. She glanced at Leonardo before smiling gently. Yes, He's someone I knew a long time ago. Jacob stepped forward and held out his paint-stained hand. I'm Jacob. Leonardo smiled and shook it carefully. It's nice to meet you, Jacob. Jacob tilted his head. You talk funny. Natalie laughed. He doesn't talk funny. He does a little. Leonardo chuckled. Maybe I do. Jacob seemed satisfied with that answer. He looked down at the paper dinosaur tucked under his arm. I made this today. Leonardo accepted it as though it were priceless. This is impressive. I gave him rocket shoes. Rocket shoes, so he can run faster than the bad dinosaurs. Leonardo laughed. I wish I'd thought of that when I was your age. Jacob smiled proudly. I think you're too old now. Natalie covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Leonardo pretended to sigh. I was afraid you might say that. For a brief moment the conversation felt completely ordinary. Yet Leonardo couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing inside him. There was something familiar about the boy's expressions. The way he wrinkled his nose while thinking. The way he smiled before answering a question. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to make leaving even harder. Jacob looked up at his mother. Can we get ice cream? Natalie checked her watch. Only if we finish your homework first. He groaned dramatically. I knew you were going to say that. Leonardo smiled. So, homework first. Jacob nodded reluctantly. Then ice cream. It sounds like a fair deal. Jacob waved as Natalie led him toward the parking lot. Bye, Mr. Leonardo. Leonardo stood there long after they disappeared from view. Chris had once told him that sometimes the heart noticed things long before the mind could explain them. For the first time, Leonardo understood exactly what his friend meant. Later that evening, Natalie agreed to meet Leonardo at a quiet coffee shop a few blocks from her apartment after Anne offered to watch Jacob. The atmosphere was calm. Soft music drifted through the room while only a handful of customers sat scattered near the windows. Neither of them touched their drinks. Leonardo broke the silence. I keep replaying those years in my head. So do I. I thought you chose another life. Ba waited far longer than Eve London. She looked into her coffee before continuing. Every birthday I wondered if you'd call. Leonardo swallowed. I checked old email accounts for years. She looked up. You did? I couldn't believe you would disappear without a reason. Natalie reached into her handbag and removed a worn envelope. I almost threw this away. Leonardo opened it carefully. Inside was a letter. It had never been mailed. I wrote it after Dad came home from the hospital, she said quietly. I didn't know where to send it. Leonardo read a few lines before stopping. His hands trembled slightly. I wrote one too. You did? It stayed in my desk. Neither of them smiled. They had both spent years speaking to someone who never received the words. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt heavy with lost time. Leonardo looked out the window before speaking again. Natalie. She already knew what was coming. The picture. She nodded. I know. He chose his words carefully. I'm not here to accuse you. I know. I'm not asking because of pride. I know. He took a slow breath. Jacob. His voice softened. How old is he? Natalie answered without hesitation. He turned 6 in April. Leonardo quietly calculated the dates. His heartbeat quickened. She noticed. I've done that math too. He looked at her. What do you mean? Natalie folded her hands together. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to reach you again. Leonardo stared at her. I never knew. I believed you had moved on, and I believed the same thing about you. A tear rolled down Natalie's cheek. I wasn't hiding Jacob from you. I know. I honestly thought you didn't want us anymore. Leonardo lowered his head. I would have been there. I know that now. The words carried no anger, only heartbreak. After another long silence, Leonardo spoke as gently as he could. Would you consider a DNA test? Natalie closed her eyes, not because she was offended, because hearing the question out loud made everything suddenly real. When she opened them again, her voice was calm. If it gives both of us the truth. She nodded. Yes. The test was arranged through an accredited medical laboratory the following morning. The process itself took only a short time. The waiting did not. Days passed. Leonardo returned to New York but found himself unable to focus. During a board meeting, one executive paused in the middle of a presentation. Leonardo? He looked up. I'm sorry. You've asked for the same numbers 3 times. I have? His assistant quietly rescheduled several appointments after noticing he wasn't himself. Meanwhile, Natalie carried on with work as best she could. Children still needed medicine. Parents still needed reassurance. Life refused to pause simply because her own had become uncertain. One evening, Anne found her sitting on the apartment balcony. "You've hardly eaten." "I'm trying." "You don't have to carry this alone." Natalie looked toward the playground where Jacob chased a soccer ball with neighborhood children. "I'm not afraid of the result." Anne sat beside her. "What are you afraid of?" Natalie smiled sadly. "Everything that comes after." Across the country, Leonardo received a call from Chris. "Any news?" "Not yet." "You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes, haven't you?" "Maybe every 4. Chris laughed. "You've always been terrible at waiting." Leonardo looked at the family photograph still open on his desk. "This isn't waiting. What is it? It feels like my whole life is holding its breath." 5 days later, Leonardo's phone rang. The laboratory. His heart immediately began pounding. "Mr. Bronx?" "Yes, the results are ready." Less than an hour later, Leonardo sat inside a private consultation room. Across the table, Natalie held her breath. Neither had spoken since arriving. A genetic counselor placed a sealed envelope between them. "I know these moments are never easy," she said kindly. "If you'd prefer, I can explain the findings." Leonardo looked at Natalie. She gave a small nod. "You should." The counselor opened the report. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she looked up. "The results show a probability of parentage greater than 99.99%. She paused gently. "Mr. Bronx, you are Jacob's biological father." The room fell silent. Leonardo closed his eyes. Not because he doubted the result, because hearing the words made the last 6 years suddenly feel real. Natalie covered her mouth as tears slipped down her cheeks. Neither of them celebrated. Neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, absorbing the weight of everything they had lost. Finally, Leonardo whispered the only words he could find. "I missed his first steps." Natalie nodded through tears. His first word. Another nod. "His first day of school." She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. "You didn't choose to miss them." Leonardo looked down at their hands. "No," his voice cracked, "but I can't get them back." Outside the office, Jacob sat in the waiting area drawing another dinosaur, completely unaware that, behind a closed door, 2 lives had just changed forever. Natalie and Leonardo agreed on one thing before leaving the clinic. Nothing about Jacob's life would change overnight. "He deserves time," Natalie said as they walked toward the parking lot. Leonardo nodded. "And honesty." "Yes, but honesty he can understand." That afternoon, they picked Jacob up from Anne's apartment. The little boy came running outside carrying a toy dinosaur tucked beneath his arm. "Mom!" He stopped when he noticed Leonardo standing beside her. His face brightened. "Mr. Leonardo!" Leonardo smiled. "Hi, buddy." Jacob held up his dinosaur. "I brought Captain Chompy. I was hoping you would." Jacob looked between the 2 adults. "Are we all going somewhere?" Natalie crouched beside him. "We thought we'd have lunch together." Jacob's eyes widened. "Can we get burgers?" Leonardo laughed. "I was about to suggest the same thing." Jacob pointed at him with complete confidence. "I knew I liked you." Natalie couldn't help smiling. Watching them together stirred emotions she hadn't expected. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just an easy conversation that felt strangely natural. At the restaurant, Jacob talked almost non-stop. He explained why dinosaurs were better than dragons, why chocolate milk tasted better through a straw, why second graders should have longer recess. Leonardo listened to every word as though each sentence mattered, because it did. He wasn't just hearing a child talk, he was discovering the personality of the son he had never known. After lunch, Jacob insisted on showing Leonardo the neighborhood park. "It's this way." He ran ahead before stopping to make sure the adults were following. When they reached the swings, Jacob climbed onto one and looked back. "Can you push me?" The question caught Leonardo off guard. He looked at Natalie. She gave him a gentle nod. Leonardo stepped behind the swing. "Ready, ready." The swing moved forward. Jacob laughed so loudly that several parents nearby turned to look. "Higher." "Not too high," Natalie called with a smile. "I've got him." Those 3 simple words settled deep inside Leonardo's heart. I've got him. For 6 years he hadn't. Now he silently promised himself that he never wanted to fail that responsibility again. A little later, Jacob climbed down from the swing and held out his hand. "Race you to the tree." Before Leonardo could answer, Jacob took off running. Leonardo laughed and chased after him. Jacob reached the tree first. I win. I think you had a head start. I did. So that wasn't very fair. Jacob grinned. I know. Leonardo laughed harder than he had in months. Natalie watched from a nearby bench. She wasn't looking at the playground anymore. She was looking at the future, one she had stopped believing could ever exist. A week later, Scarlett returned to the architectural firm she had founded years earlier. Her colleagues welcomed her warmly but carefully avoided mentioning the canceled wedding. By lunchtime, her longtime business partner, Melissa, knocked gently on her office door. Can I come in? Of course. Melissa sat across from her. You don't have to pretend you're fine. Scarlett smiled faintly. I wasn't planning to. Melissa hesitated. Have you spoken to Leonardo? A few times. And? Scarlett looked out the window. The child is his. Melissa lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. Scarlett nodded slowly. So am I. After a moment, Melissa asked the question everyone else had been afraid to ask. Do you hate him? Scarlett answered without thinking. No. Really? He didn't leave because he stopped loving me. She paused. He left because he discovered someone needed him even more. Melissa reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. That doesn't make it hurt less. No. Scarlett smiled sadly. But it keeps me from filling my heart with bitterness. Later that evening, Scarlett removed the wedding invitations she had kept in a decorative box. She looked at them one final time before placing them in the recycling bin. Not because the memories meant nothing, because she was finally ready to stop living inside them. Leonardo and Natalie met several times over the following weeks. Sometimes they talked while Jacob played nearby. Other times they sat together after he had gone to bed. One evening they found themselves walking through a quiet neighborhood. The conversation drifted naturally from the present to the past. Leonardo looked down the sidewalk. I kept blaming myself. So did I. I wondered what I could have done differently. Natalie smiled gently. I've replayed those days 1,000 times. And? I always reach the same conclusion. What conclusion? We were two people trying our best with information neither of us actually had. Leonardo nodded slowly. I wish I'd searched harder. I wish I'd written one more letter. I wish I'd driven to Ohio. I wish I'd come back to New York. They both laughed softly. Not because the situation was funny, because they had finally stopped arguing with the past. Natalie looked toward the evening sky. We can't change those 6 years. No, but we can decide what happens tomorrow. Leonardo turned toward her. I'd like that. So would I. Neither spoke about romance. Neither spoke about second chances. The focus wasn't on rebuilding what they had once shared. It was on becoming the parents Jacob deserved. Everything else could wait. Children notice more than adults often realize. A few days later, Jacob sat at the kitchen table drawing another dinosaur while Leonardo helped assemble a bookshelf Anne had ordered online. Jacob looked up from his crayons. Mr. Leonardo? Yeah, buddy? You come here a lot now. Leonardo smiled. I do. I like it. I'm glad. Jacob returned to coloring before asking another question. Are you Mom's friend forever? The screwdriver stopped turning. Leonardo looked toward Natalie. She quietly set down the dish she was drying. Neither wanted to rush this conversation. Leonardo walked over and sat beside Jacob. I hope I'll be around for a very long time. Jacob nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Good. Why's that? Because you listen when I tell stories. Leonardo laughed. I'll always make time for your stories. Jacob smiled. Even the dinosaur ones? Especially the dinosaur ones. Jacob seemed satisfied. He returned to his drawing without another question. Later that evening, after Jacob had fallen asleep, Leonardo stood quietly outside the bedroom door. Natalie joined him. He likes you, she whispered. Leonardo's eyes remained on the sleeping little boy. I love him. The words came so naturally that they surprised even him. Natalie looked at Leonardo and saw tears gathering in his eyes. She gently slipped her hand into his. This time, neither of them was mourning the years they had lost. They were grateful for the years they still had ahead of them. The following Saturday, Leonardo arrived at Natalie's apartment carrying a baseball glove, a second glove that looked much smaller, and a paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. Jacob opened the door before Natalie could. You're here. I said I'd be here at 10. Jacob looked at the clock. It's only 9:58. I didn't want to be late. Jacob grinned. I like people who are early. Leonardo held up the bakery bag. I also brought cinnamon rolls. Jacob gasped. Mom, he's bringing presents now. Natalie laughed from the kitchen. I hope you brought enough for everyone. I learned a long time ago that showing up with one cinnamon roll is a dangerous decision. Anne walked in from the hallway and smiled. You're catching on quickly. After breakfast, Jacob noticed the gloves. Are those for us? Leonardo nodded. I thought we could throw a baseball around. Jacob's eyes widened. I've never played before. Neither did I, until someone taught me. Who? My dad. Jacob picked up the smaller glove and slipped it onto his hand. It feels funny. It'll feel better after about 10 minutes. Jacob looked up with a determined smile. Then let's not waste those 10 minutes. Natalie watched them leave for the park. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Hope. The baseball lesson was far from perfect. Jacob missed the ball more often than he caught it. Leonardo threw one so high that it landed in a nearby bush. Jacob laughed so hard he nearly fell over. I thought you said you knew how to do this. I said my dad taught me. Did he teach you the bush throw? Leonardo laughed. No, I didn't think so. An older man walking his dog stopped nearby. Looks like someone's having fun. Jacob proudly pointed toward Leonardo. He's teaching me. The man smiled. Well, keep practicing. You'll both get better. Both. The word lingered with Leonardo long after the man continued walking. Hours passed without either of them noticing. Eventually, Jacob sat down on the grass. I'm tired. You earned a break. Jacob leaned back on his elbows. Can we come again next week? If your mom says yes. Jacob looked toward Natalie, who had been reading beneath a nearby tree. Please? She smiled. I don't see why not. Jacob pumped his fist. Yes. Leonardo realized something in that moment. Jacob didn't care whether every throw was perfect. He cared that someone stayed. The Saturdays became a tradition. One weekend they visited the Science Museum. Another weekend they built a birdhouse in Anne's backyard. The first attempt leaned noticeably to one side. Jacob frowned. It looks crooked. Leonardo stepped back to inspect it. It definitely has personality. Anne burst into laughter. I've never heard anyone compliment a crooked birdhouse before. Jacob folded his arms. Birds won't mind. Leonardo nodded. I think you're right. When they finally hung it from a tree, Jacob stared up proudly. What if no birds move in? Leonardo smiled. Sometimes good things take a little while. Jacob thought about that. So we just wait. We keep checking. A week later, Jacob came running into the house. They're here. Everyone hurried outside. A pair of small bluebirds had built a nest inside the crooked birdhouse. Jacob looked up at Leonardo with excitement shining across his face. You were right. Leonardo smiled. No. What? We were right. The difference mattered. They weren't building memories separately anymore. They were building them together. One evening, Natalie was called back to the hospital for an emergency. She looked apologetically at Jacob. I'll be back as soon as I can. Jacob tried to smile. It's okay. Anne had been delayed at work, leaving only one option. Natalie looked at Leonardo. Would you mind staying with him for a couple of hours? I'd be happy to. After dinner, Jacob disappeared into his bedroom and returned carrying a worn storybook. You have to do the voices. Leonardo laughed. That's a rule? It's the biggest rule. I'd better not mess it up then. They settled onto the couch. Leonardo opened the first page. A few minutes into the story, Jacob interrupted. That bear doesn't sound sleepy. It doesn't? No. What should he sound like? Jacob demonstrated with an exaggerated yawn. Leonardo copied him. Better. By the end of the second chapter, Jacob's eyelids had begun to droop. Leonardo quietly closed the book. Finished? Jacob shook his head without opening his eyes. One more tomorrow. I can do that. As Leonardo tucked the blanket around him, Jacob whispered something so softly it was almost lost. Good night. A pause followed. Then, Dad. Jacob's eyes remained closed. He had already fallen asleep. Leonardo froze. He stood there for several seconds, unable to move. The word had come naturally, unplanned, completely innocent. When Natalie returned later that night, she found Leonardo sitting quietly on the living room couch. Everything okay? He looked up with tears in his eyes. He called me Dad. Natalie's own eyes filled. Neither of them said another word. Some moments didn't need explaining. Weeks turned into months. Leonardo adjusted his schedule so he could spend more time in Ohio. Board meetings were moved. Video conferences replaced unnecessary travel. For the first time since founding his company, success no longer meant spending every waking hour at the office. One afternoon, Chris flew in for a visit. He found Leonardo helping Jacob assemble a model rocket on the dining room table. Chris folded his arms with a grin. I leave you alone for a few months, and suddenly you're an expert on toy rockets? Leonardo laughed. I've still got a lot to learn. Jacob looked up. He's getting better. Chris smiled. I can see that. After the rocket was finished, Jacob ran outside to show Anne. Chris turned toward Leonardo. You look different. I do? Happier. Leonardo watched Jacob racing across the yard. I used to think success meant building a company. And now? He smiled. Now I know it's also being there when someone runs inside to tell you they finished a rocket. Chris nodded. I like this version of you. So do I. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Jacob came running back with the model rocket held high above his head. Guess what? What? It flies. Leonardo laughed. Then tomorrow. He placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder. Let's go see how high it can really go. Jacob beamed. It's a date. Leonardo looked at Natalie. She smiled back. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time in many years they weren't afraid to find out together. Nearly a year after the canceled wedding, Leonardo drove Natalie and Jacob to a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. Tree-lined streets stretched in every direction, and children rode bicycles along wide sidewalks while neighbors chatted from their front yards. Jacob looked through the car window. Where are we? Leonardo smiled. I want to show you something. They stopped in front of a newly finished house surrounded by young maple trees. It wasn't the biggest home on the street. It wasn't the most expensive, but it had one feature that immediately caught Natalie's attention. A wide front porch stretched across the entire front of the house. She stood perfectly still. Leonardo noticed. You remember? Natalie looked at him with tears already forming. The park bench. He nodded. I never forgot. Jacob looked from one adult to the other. What park bench? Leonardo laughed softly. That's a very long story. Jacob grinned. I like long stories. Leonardo knelt beside him. When your mom and I were much younger, I made her a promise. What kind of promise? I told her that one day I'd build a house with the biggest front porch I could. Jacob studied the porch with great seriousness. It is pretty big. Natalie laughed through her tears. I think you approve. I do. Leonardo looked back at Natalie. It took longer than I expected. She smiled warmly. Some promises just need a little extra time. The front door opened to the smell of fresh wood and new paint. Sunlight poured through the large windows, warming every room. Jacob immediately took off running. My room, Leonardo called after him. You don't even know which one is yours. I'll find it. Natalie wandered slowly through the kitchen. She ran her fingers across the countertop before looking toward Leonardo. You remembered. What? I always wanted enough space to bake cookies without balancing bowls on top of the microwave. He smiled. I remember more than you think. She walked into the living room. Family photographs already rested on the shelves. Not expensive artwork, not awards, just moments. Jacob holding his first baseball glove, the crooked birdhouse, their science museum visit, a picture of all four of them, including Anne, laughing around the dinner table. Natalie stopped in front of the photographs. You printed these? They're my favorites. She looked at him. You've made this feel like a home. Leonardo shook his head gently. No. He smiled toward the hallway where Jacob's footsteps echoed. We did. That evening they carried mugs of hot chocolate onto the porch while Jacob chased fireflies across the front yard. The neighborhood had settled into the peaceful rhythm of early evening. A couple walked their dog. Someone watered flowers across the street. Children called out final goodbyes before heading inside for dinner. Jacob ran back toward the porch. I caught one. He carefully opened his hands. The tiny firefly drifted into the air before disappearing into the fading light. Jacob laughed. I think he wanted to go home. Leonardo smiled. Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing we can do. Jacob nodded, as though that made perfect sense before running off again. Natalie leaned back in her chair. You know. What? This looks exactly the way you described it. Leonardo looked around. I was close. No. She smiled. You were exactly right. He became quiet. I couldn't keep my first promise. Natalie turned toward him. You did. I said I'd build it for you. You built it for us. He looked toward Jacob. I miss so much. You've been making up for it every day. Leonardo took a slow breath. I can't change the years we lost. No. But I can promise something else. She waited. I'll never take another day with either of you for granted. Natalie reached for his hand. I believe you. A week after moving into the new house, the doorbell rang. Jacob raced to answer it. I'll get it. When he opened the door, he smiled politely. Hi. Standing on the porch was Scarlett. She held a small gift bag tied with a blue ribbon. Natalie stepped into the hallway. For a brief moment, the two women simply looked at each other. Scarlett smiled first. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Jacob looked up curiously. Do you know each other? Scarlett laughed gently. We're just meeting. She handed the gift bag to Jacob. I heard someone moved into a new house. Jacob looked inside. A dinosaur puzzle. You like dinosaurs? They're my favorite. I guessed correctly then. Leonardo joined them at the doorway. Scarlett. She smiled. I was in the neighborhood. He knew she wasn't. She had come because she wanted to close this chapter with peace. I wanted to congratulate you, she said. Natalie stepped forward. Thank you. Scarlett looked around once more before smiling. It's a beautiful home. It already feels like one, Natalie replied. Scarlett nodded. I can see that. As she turned to leave, Jacob called after her. Thanks for my puzzle. She waved. You're very welcome. Leonardo watched her walk to her car. Some goodbyes deserve sadness. Others deserved gratitude. This one deserved both. Late that evening, after Jacob had fallen asleep, Leonardo and Natalie sat alone on the porch. The neighborhood had grown quiet. Crickets chirped in the distance while a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Natalie rested her head against his shoulder. You know what I just realized? What? We're sitting on the porch. He smiled. We are. She laughed softly. And you're still looking at me the same way. Leonardo turned toward her. I told you I would. When we were young, I thought it was just a sweet thing to say. And now? I know you meant every word. He took her hand. I wasn't able to keep every promise when I wanted to. She intertwined her fingers with his. But you never stopped trying. They sat together without speaking for a long while. Some moments become unforgettable not because of grand speeches or dramatic surprises, but because they finally bring peace to promises that waited years to be fulfilled. The porch was finished. The family was together. And for the first time in a very long time, home was no longer a dream. It was where they already were. 1 year later, the front porch had become exactly what Leonardo once imagined. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, spilled syrup, and Jacob insisting that every breakfast should include chocolate chips. Sunday evenings often ended with neighbors stopping by for lemonade and conversation. The crooked birdhouse still hung in the backyard. It had become home to several generations of bluebirds. Leonardo never replaced it. Jacob reminded him why. The birds don't care if it's perfect. Neither did Leonardo. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Jacob looked up from the comic book in his lap. Dad? Yeah, buddy. Were you always going to find me? Leonardo smiled. I never knew where to look. Jacob thought about that. But once you found me, I wasn't letting you go. Jacob leaned against him. Good. A comfortable silence settled over the porch. Natalie watched the two of them with a smile that said more than words ever could. Years earlier, one accidental photograph had seemed like the beginning of heartbreak. Instead, it became the path that led a family back to one another. Life doesn't always offer second chances when we expect them. Sometimes they arrive quietly, inside a forgotten message, a child's smile, or a promise that refuses to be forgotten. And when they do, the bravest thing we can do is answer them. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Do you think Leonardo made the right decision by canceling his wedding to search for the truth, or would you have handled things differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read them all, and your perspective might inspire our next story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Mr. Williams' Storytime, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable journey. Thank you for spending your time with us, and until our next story, take care of yourself and the people you love.